But this event is something new. Future Harvest is working with two partners, the Regional Food System Project at Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments and the Harry Hughes Center for Agroecology. And we're seeking to tap the wealth of knowledge of all actors along the food chain, from seed to stomach. We want to better understand the whole food system in which the farmer operates. And mainly, we want to know how this system can be strengthened to be more resilient to global shocks, such as we've experienced during the pandemic. If you recall, at the beginning of the pandemic, staples like flour, meat, canned goods, and produce were very scarce in grocery stores. And it was, at least for me, shocking to witness just how vulnerable our global supply system is. And this is the system that we've become so dependent on. So where did many consumers turn to? They turned to their local farmers in droves. And even though the global supply is flowing again, farmers are still reporting off the chart demand. I'm talking about local farmers. Their early pandemic pivots, which are online marketplaces, home deliveries, new safety protocols, this is their new norm. But it's not enough. The food system in which we operate does not nurture local suppliers, aggregators, and distributors over the long term. So farmers are still working with ill-suited infrastructure, skilled labor shortages, erratic weather, and the uncertainty of what this new normal poses for their businesses. And you add to this the scourge of systemic racism, and which compounds these issues for farmers and food businesses owners of color. So again, the question we're asking today is, how can we create a regional food system which is more resilient and crisis ready? More specifically, what policy, infrastructure, and education changes are needed to build a strong local supply and demand chain? We are honored to have 5 of the Chesapeake region's best and brightest farmers with us here today, and they're here to share their thoughts about what they think is necessary to ensure thriving supply and demand for locally produced food. Before I introduce them, I want to first mention that you all will also have the opportunity to share your ideas. In the chat is a link to the RCR quote idea dump. RCR again stands for Resilient Crisis Ready Project. And it seeks to create an open source, available to all RCR action plan for building a stronger, more resilient food system. Some housekeeping remarks. On this call, we had at last count just over 200 registrants. We have policymakers, funders, nonprofits, academics, farmers. You can see, if you haven't clicked on the Mentimeter link in the chat, please do so now. And the first slide will give you the opportunity to say who you are. Everybody on this call will have access to this plan when it's ready. And we expect that to be sometime in the spring of 2021. And at the Future Harvest Conference, we will also be sharing the results and asking people to weigh in more, and we'll have a prioritizing exercise in one of the sessions. So please, it'd be great if you all could attend that. Some housekeeping remarks. Please keep yourself on mute. We'd love to see your faces, so feel free to put your camera on. The icon is usually in the lower left of your screen. And then how this thing is going to flow, the panelists and I are going to have some back and forth. We're going to go through panelist by panelist, and then we're going to open up to your questions. So feel free to start entering your questions as soon as you want into the chat. We have somebody curating those questions, and they'll be sharing them with me. And at the end of the panel, I'll be asking 1 or 2 questions, and then we're going to go to the first poll. Answer 2 questions, go to the second poll. We have 4 total polls. This is going to take a little while. But we think it's kind of our sneaky way of getting you all to fill out the RCR idea dump, if you do it this way or if you do it by hitting our survey link on our website. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Someone can answer them for you. We're going to start with our first panelist. Will Morrow is the former owner-operator of Whitmore Farm. It was a small livestock farm near Emmitsburg, Maryland. After 12 years of running a very highly regarded operation, Will and his husband pulled up stakes, they closed shop, and they moved to Florida. And I decided to pull him out of farming retirement because I wanted him to share with you all what was it that led him to make his decision to close his farm. It was not an easy decision. And what role the policy environment and other factors in the food system played in his decision. So Will, please tell us more about Whitmore Farm, what you raised, and how you ran the farm. Are you on mute?
Awesome. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for that illustrious introduction. I'll try to live up to it. Yes, so Kent Oscom and I purchased the farm back in 2003. And it was in Frederick County, Maryland. It was 28 acres. It hadn't been farmed in over 40 years. I think there was a family that was just, renting the home as a residence, but the fields had been overtaken by trees regrowing, and all the infrastructure had disintegrated. The fences and stuff were long gone. There were 2 barns and a house, but they were falling down as well. So it took us several years to build out the infrastructure and obtain breeding stock and ramp up our numbers, because we knew we wanted to go into livestock production, meat production, and it's a numbers game. You breed them, and so 2 equals 4 equals 8, and it takes a while to get your numbers up really high, which you need to do. So Whitmore Farm was a pasture-based livestock farm. We did obtain organic certification after a couple of years, and I was really proud of that. It was the first farm in Maryland that was certified organic for lamb and goat production, and that was no small feat, jumping through those regulatory hurdles and getting working with the local abattoir to get them interested, first of all, and then to get them to actually do all of their paperwork on their end. After a number of years, though, we let the organic certification expire, but continued to abide by most of those same principles. The certification became kind of a cost-benefit analysis, and it was there were a few things about the program that we didn't feel were very workable long-term, and also the paperwork requirements were just really burdensome from a labor standpoint. And the other thing we realized in talking to both our wholesale and our retail clients was that many of them had visited the farm, and they just had confidence because we were a local grower and they saw the quality of our products, and they didn't seem to really care. I think they had enough confidence in us all without that certification. We raise many different types of meat: lamb, goat, pork, chicken, rabbits. Since we chose to specialize in more rare heritage breeds to differentiate our products in the marketplace, we also sold breeding stock, which generated additional revenue streams. But volume-wise, if you look over the 16 years of production, pork, lamb, and eggs, and day-old chicks from our hatchery were our primary products. Those were the biggest money makers, and that's what they were a constant throughout the entire 16 years. Things like the rabbits and some of the other and the goats, those products came on and offline based on, how profitable they were and what the market demand was like. We also had a greenhouse and did some organic vegetable and cut flower production. That was mostly to help us with the marketing of our meat and eggs, because all of those products were either frozen or refrigerated in coolers. And so it made a big difference to have a table full of sunflowers and bright red tomatoes and all of that. And it also helped to feed the staff on the farm as well. We started out exclusively retail, and then we started to mix in commercial sales as our counts grew and our production quantities grew in volume. But I would say by the end, towards the end of the farm business, we were entirely commercial sales. So over time, the commercial sales just kept taking up more and more of our inventory. And I can talk a little bit more about the reasons for that later. But so by the end, we were pretty much 90% commercial. And to give you a sense of scale, I think our first year of sales was around $12,000. And then at our peak, before we decided to sell the farm, we were at $425,000 a year in gross revenue. And again, the farm was 28 acres in Frederick County, Maryland, about an hour and a half north of DC and an hour and a half west of Baltimore. So that was super helpful as far as having a reasonable access to two very large, wealthy markets.
Okay, thank you. Just a point of clarification, when you say commercial sales as opposed to what?
As opposed to retail. So wholesale accounts, restaurants,
Wholesale.
grocery stores, those types of things.
Okay.
Versus farmers market, direct to consumer, on farm sales, or those,
Okay, great. So I have the privilege of knowing you as a friend as well as in my role at Future Harvest. And I know that the economics of farming, you just felt that it was backbreaking work and it just wasn't producing the returns that you needed, even when you grossed $425,000 a year, which is pretty impressive. Can you share what didn't and did work for your bottom line?
Yeah, so let me just give you a little background into how we were viewing the farm business and the economic pressure and demands that we were putting on the farm to perform. We purchased the farm by cashing out some of our 401 retirement savings and taking a hit there. And my husband continued to work full-time off the farm to cover the mortgage, the utilities, infrastructure, investments, and even bridge some of the farm purchases and salaries in the early years. We were investing non-farm income into the business to launch it and prime the pump, so to speak. The farm did eventually pay back much of the personal investment over time, but the financial side of things were pretty complicated. We created an LLC, which is a type of corporation, early on. And when we would go over the farm numbers at the end of every year, you really had to factor in depreciation, government subsidies, tax benefits, and easement sales into the equation to get the numbers to work. Our goal from the beginning was for us to invest heavily in the farm business and grow it to a point where it become economically self-sustaining, where we could become more removed from the day-to-day operation of the farm as we got closer to retirement. Even possibly, supplement our retirement, and wouldn't that be a great thing after, dedicating 2 decades into, building a business. So we were pretty, I like to think we're pretty savvy. We consulted with, business people and banks and friends, and Future Harvest would have a lot of business people from the University of Maryland available to us at their conferences. And so, we really cast a broad net and trying to get as much help on the business side of things as possible. We were constantly revising our business model over the years, trying out different products, different production methods, and different sales outlets to maximize efficiency and increase profitability. But in the end, we just were never able to, even though we made a lot of progress, we were never able to reach our goal. After we exhausted all the revisions and pivoting in our business model to make those changes and try to make it profitable, we just realized that it would never be what we wanted it to be, and what we had set out to accomplish. And so then it became what I would call a lifestyle career. And by this time, we're in our mid-50s. And after 16 years of wrestling sheep and chasing pigs and long, exhausting days, we just decided that we had aged out of farming and we're ready for a lifestyle change. So we sold parts of the business that were still, robust and viable. And we sold the farm assets, and then we actually sold the farm itself. Because of the scale of the operation, and because we're talking about live animals and breeding cycles, it took 2 years to unwind things and close everything out. But that's kind of like the big picture of how we started out, with looking at the economics of the farm, what happened, and then where we ended up. And it's a pretty complicated story, and I'm happy to delve into other specific components of that if people are interested.
Thanks. Maybe in the Q&A, we can address more of the specifics. The purpose of this webinar is to get to how policy changes, infrastructure changes, educational changes, research changes, what needs to happen in the food system, what could have changed in the food system to help you to help your farm thrive more and be more, something that you're willing to go into old age doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the brass ring that we're all after in the sustainable ag community, is to make it so that people can make a living growing healthy food that's raised in a nutritious food. It's raised in a way that doesn't harm the environment. I'd like to start off by acknowledging all the state and national policies that are in effect that did help our operation before I start going into maybe what is needed. There are numerous federal and state cost share programs that were absolutely essential for us to afford fencing, animal waterers, livestock laneways, manure storage buildings, greenhouses, solar energy production to offset our electrical needs, which were substantial. All of those things we would not have been able to do if it weren't for the federal and state cost share programs that were available to us. And the thing is, those programs need to be better funded and more widely available so that they can even accomplish more. My previous career, as Dina had mentioned, was with the federal government. I spent a number of years with the Environmental Protection Agency, and so I knew a little bit about government bureaucracies and how to fill out forms and how to find the right people to talk to. But it should be made easier, and also those existing programs should be better funded, because they were all on a first come, first served basis, and there was never enough money for all the farmers that wanted a greenhouse in any given year, for example. And then the other thing is, the reality is food production in the US and frankly, most of the world is heavily subsidized. And so the question then becomes, as a matter of policy, what type of agricultural products do we want to subsidize and how heavily? Right now, the focus is on commodities and not on fruit and vegetable production and things that actually make it onto the dinner table. And we just need to change that. And a lot of that, has to do with the Farm Bill and, making sure that those programs, that new programs are put in there and that existing programs are expanded and fully funded. The other thing is I think the regulatory framework also needs to be overhauled to acknowledge the diversity of farm production methods out there. Right now, the regulatory system is set up for factory farming, period. So most states don't know how to handle small scale sustainable businesses. As a result, they try to force fit the factory model permitting process and paperwork requirements. Not only does it not result in any increased health protection for consumers, but it also harms the economic viability of small businesses. The regulatory oversight must be commensurate with the risk posed by an operation. I'm not asking for a carte blanche, exemption, but the amount of oversight needs to be tailored to the real risks being posed. And again, I'll just say it again, the Farm Bill, I hope the sustainable ag community is gearing up for the next Farm Bill cycle, because it's just, we have to have our interests represented. And there's so many complex negotiations that start 18 months in advance of that, of the bill, draft bill actually hitting the floor for debate in Congress. And so groups like Future Harvest and other folks and individuals, I mean, I can't tell you how many times we wrote our local congressman and senator to bring issues to their attention. We actually went down to Capitol Hill on a couple of occasions with Future Harvest and other, a handful of farmers, trying to really compel senators and representatives to understand what was at stake and why they needed to include certain language in a bill or not include certain language in a bill. And I know it's really hard for farmers because time is our most critical asset. There's just aren't enough hours in the day, but it's important to make time for those types of things.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to go through all the panelists now, but we'll be asking you more questions. Oops, am I still on? Yeah, I am. Okay. Thelonious Cook is the owner-operator of Mighty Thundercloud Farm. I'm going to say that again because I think it's a great name. Mighty Thundercloud Farm on Virginia's Eastern Shore. It's a diversified vegetable farm. I read an article that was all about Thelonious just recently in the Bay Journal. And he grows unusual vegetables as well. So I asked Thelonious to speak today because he is way down on Virginia's Eastern Shore and he faces some daunting infrastructure hurdles. He's far away from the major cities of Baltimore, Washington. He has to have his market there where he is. He has to cross a high toll bridge to get to his farm. And he puts a lot of miles on his car to get from home to farm to market. So Thelonious, can you tell us about Mighty Thundercloud Farm, what you grow and where you market?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, like you mentioned, my farm is on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. I started farming back in 2015. It's a 7-acre farm. And in terms of, what I do and how I farm, I try to be reflective of using, indigenous practices and specifically, my African heritage. And increasingly be more conscious about, sort of growing food for gene-based diets, thinking about like, the genetic proclivities people have developed, from long stays in an environment, specifically like, Africans, that have been, displaced to America. And we're seeing different health problems manifest themselves. Like heart disease, is the number one killer for, well, it's, I think, the number one killer for all US citizens, but specifically for African Americans, it ranks, really high. And part of that is, access to healthy food and also foods that, that aren't, well, don't reflect sort of our ancestry, I guess. So I've started to incorporate more ethnic crops, crops that come from like West Africa, callaloo, hibiscus, ginger, turmeric, so just experimenting with different type of ethnic foods. And yeah, like you mentioned, the challenge of accessing these urban markets was, I mean, it's actually why I started farming. To be honest with you, growing up in the Hampton Roads area, you see, just these communities that really have a issue with food insecurity, meaning access to healthy foods. And so that was my initial goal. And even though I was farming on the Eastern Shore, was to bring that food or to build a bridge, to urban communities. So yeah. So yeah, I've just been sort of building on that, that idea. And but yeah, I'll let you ask the next question.
Okay. So what, being out from where you are, what kind of infrastructure changes would help you tap more markets? I'm talking about things like cold storage, uh, shared distribution networks. That just what kind of what have been your thoughts as you farmed where you farm?
Yeah, so I started from ground zero with basically no infrastructure. I did have family land that was passed to me, um, but it's been sort of I farmed with the philosophy of, eating an elephant bite by bite. So each year, adding a new piece of infrastructure, whether that was a high tunnel, whether that was irrigation, whether that was a cool bot, a mobile cool bot unit, to help me, store food and be able to travel as well. Um, And I actually, over the past 2 years, participated in a feasibility study that was initiated with, I think it was Claire Vaughn was a part of the Accomack and Northampton County Regional Commission. And they partnered with Virginia Tech Economic Development and gathered a bunch of, producers on the Eastern Shore. It was a mix of growers, also artisans from just different crafts, and then aquaculture. And that was the goal of the study, was to think about the feasibility of starting like a regional food hub, um, or a cooperative marketing opportunity. And one of the key, I guess, findings out of just hearing from everybody was that what would help our region specifically was to reignite this sort of regional brand. I guess this, when you think about the Eastern Shore historically, used to be like the breadbasket of the United States. We're like geographically. In a very strategic location. Like you have Highway 13 that runs from like New Jersey all the way down to North Carolina. So we get a lot of people just traveling, from, you know, um, just the top of the country to the bottom of the country. So um, at one point, we did produce a lot of what we call, truck crops, food for, human consumption. Um, so there was a very vibrant economy. There were also canning and processing facilities. But then at one point, like I think after the depression, you started having this shift. These large meat processing facilities like the Purdue's came in. And so a lot of the farming started to switch from growing food from human consumption to, um, you know, poultry feed, corn, soybean, and stuff like that. So, so we sort of lost, that, um, that designation as being this huge, breadbasket, and so one of the things that came out of this study was thinking about how can we recreate that, that image, get transition these farms back to thinking about growing food for, human consumption, and just rebuilding that brand. You spoke about the markets that we have access to, up in DC, Philadelphia, and then also down to the, south, the Virginia Beach area. So they don't really know about, they don't have understanding, the soil, the food, and things like that that we produce. So in terms of thinking about infrastructure, while maybe the long-term goal is to maybe build some sort of regional hub, um, you is first to kind of rebuild that, establish that brand by maybe through some sort of collaborative marketing, effort. And I know there's some familiar faces here that I'm seeing, like Lisa Garfield with the, Delmarva Farming Union. So thinking about some sort of brand, some sort of label that would mean something for like products that were produced on the Eastern Shore, and then that would, give some sort of value when we do go into these sort of other, larger markets. Um, but understanding also that there are groups that are often excluded, and don't have access to the same resources, so ensuring that, people who maybe started like myself, who didn't have a huge lot of resources, have access to things like commercial kitchens, which allow me to, produce value added products, and, also get into maybe um, other institutions like universities, schools, senior citizens facilities, prisons, things that would help to increase the, resilience when things like a pandemic occurs.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Um, so I was just curious about, has anybody tried down there a cooperative distribution network, because distances are long between market areas?
Yeah, like I said, that is part of the effort, that, um, this planning or this steering committee was looking at. Um, I know this year there was a market that popped up, Pearl Market, and I know from the creators of that, their initial goal was to create sort of a hub where people, farmers could rent, refrigerator space, and then also that would be a retail space where, would include a farmer's market. So this was sort of the first year, and I know this year was unique, because of a lot of different reasons. But they did have a very successful farmers market. I don't know what their goal is, going forward, in terms of being more of like a regional hub. And then there's also I've been active with the Coops, the co-op market, which is up in Princess Anne near UMES. And that's a very interesting concept as well. They essentially transformed the 500 uh, meter chicken coop into this sort of, retail space. So it's It's a farmer's market, and they also started an actual co-op store, which sells, bulk herbs as well as other value-added products from producers. So that was two, initiatives that I know of that started both this year, and they both seem to be very successful because of this renewed interest to, more local, you know, um, food systems. And
Great. Um, Last question. You went through Future Harvest Beginner Farmer Training Program. What other kinds of education and training do you think would help farmers in your region thrive?
yeah, for sure. Resilience minded training. I mean, I definitely appreciate the capacity building that organizations like Future Harvest does, because that's how I learned, is from being able to go on farm tours and learning from other farmers, and hands-on practical things like, how are they dealing with pests, how are they dealing with nutrient management, um, and then specific things, I think, in terms of building resilience, like climate smart agriculture, and then accessing sort of these anchor institutions, like, so helping them penetrate markets, I guess, and in addition to just the capacity building, is actually taking a farmer from saying, okay, think about what products you should grow, um, and how to market them.
Okay. Thank you. Um, MK.
Hello.
Hi. MK is the owner operator of Open Book Farm near Frederick, Maryland. Open Book is a diversified farm selling vegetables and pasture raised meats and poultry via CSA. She's a Future Harvest board member. And I know that you cooperate a lot with research projects on your farm with Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Or do I have that wrong? Yes.
We've done some work with him. A lot sounds, I wouldn't have thought
Okay.
described it that
Okay.
dramatically. But.
So tell us about your farm and your markets.
Absolutely. So as Dina mentioned, the largest thing that we do is pasture raised livestock. So it's my husband and me together, and then our employees. We raise meat chickens, laying hens, pigs, steers, turkeys, and we also grow certified organic veggies, though that is a relatively small scale, more intensive thing, whereas the livestock takes up a lot more of our room. In terms of sales, we call them CSAs because it's a term that is familiar to people, but it's kind of more like a pre-buy discount sort of thing. But we have shares that people can sign up for to be a part of our farm. But we also retail from the farm, just like any person can come during our sales times. And we also go to a farmer's market in Petworth, DC. And we do wholesale of some things, certain vegetables, like just a few vegetables we grow on a scale to wholesale. And then also our chickens, since we raise about 5,000 meat chickens a year, we wholesale more than half of that, some of which to a friend who has a vegetable CSA and offers our chickens as an add-on. We sell to a co-op grocery store in Frederick, and then occasionally just a few other places. So that's most of what we do and how we sell it.
Okay. So I asked you to speak mainly because slaughterhouse issues have been a big issue for you. And there's all sorts of talk about mobile poultry processing units. We've had a lot of responses in the RCR survey about them. So I'd like for you to tell us about what you wrote in the RCR survey and your thoughts about interstate meat sales and what you think is needed infrastructure wise or policy or anything else that would help you with your business?
Sure. So there's kind of two different conversations that I think are important to have about meat processing and how that will interplay with small scale organic farmers or regenerative farmers, whatever term you want to use. So the first would be the issue of USDA inspected slaughterhouses, which is more of an issue for beef, pork, goats, lambs, any of those animals. If you're going to sell them by the cut, are required by federal law to be processed at a USDA inspected slaughterhouse. And in a way, in Maryland, where we are, we're pretty fortunate. There are a number of different slaughterhouses that meet that criteria. But even though there are probably 5 or 6 within an hour and a half to 2 hours of us, it's not nearly enough to meet the number, to meet the demand for animal slaughter. And kind of side note, the quality ranges a lot. There are some that are great, and there are some that they exist, but I will never, ever take my animals to them. So there, as an example, to be very specific about this. So we're finishing about 30 pigs a year. And normally we call in and make our dates for those animals in March, April. And those dates are going to be some in the early summer and the majority in the late fall. This year, because there was so much more demand for custom USDA slaughterhouses, and I'm not entirely sure, I have theories about why that is, but I don't know the answer. Because the demand has increased so rapidly and the supply has not, of slots has not changed at all. When I called in the summer and asked, like, do I need to call about 2021? They said, oh yeah, we're almost full for 2021. So in July, I was making my slaughterhouse dates for October of 2021. And even so was kind of having to shift dates around because it was like, you know, can I have this date? And they'd say, we're already kind of full. Could you shift it this way or that way? So at that point, I haven't even seen the hanging weights that I've gotten on the animals that I'm raising this year in 2020. And our processor is great. We are really happy with the work that they do, but we can't expand given those constraints. And just thinking more broadly about, we're pretty happy at the scale that we're operating. I'd prefer to be able to have a little more flexibility in our processing dates. But if organizations like CASA want there to be more people doing the kind of work that we're doing, there need to be a lot more slaughterhouses that can provide the services that are necessary to our business. Because if you were to try to start a pasture-based livestock operation right now, you probably would not be able to get a space at a slaughterhouse, or you wouldn't be able to get a slot at a slaughterhouse that would really benefit your business. You might be able to get a space, but there could be, you know, bad things happening to your meat. So that's one issue. And in terms of what needs to be done, honestly, I feel like that's maybe a question that should be asked to the processors, because I mean, I know about what I need, but I don't know fully what the constraints are that they're operating under. My understanding is that the USDA really doesn't like dealing with small processors because it's more inefficient for them. They're federally required to supply inspectors, is my understanding. And for them, for the USDA, it's a lot simpler to send inspectors to enormous plants, which is where we had the problems at the beginning of the pandemic of really significant COVID exposure within the plants, and those plants weren't able to operate. And then all of a sudden, like 20% of the pork processing capacity of the United States is gone. So my impression is that the USDA doesn't really like small processors and makes it very difficult to open or operate a small USDA inspected abattoir. But that's really a question that, I mean, those people need to be brought to the table so that we can understand what would be necessary for those sorts of operations to expand or for new ones to come online, because I think it's critically necessary. It's very clear that there's not enough space for the system that we're all farming in to expand, given those parameters. So that's one thing. The other thing is the poultry issue. So if you were listening carefully, you may have noticed that I said we raise chickens, but I didn't mention anything about USDA inspection of chickens. So legally, you are allowed to process poultry and rabbits on your own farm and sell it retail without USDA inspection, but that only applies if you're selling within your own state. And each state can have different regulations around the poultry processing, so they can add regulations to what the USDA has already stated for poultry processing, but the USDA basically doesn't get involved unless you cross state lines. And this matters in cases where you have a major metropolitan area like DC that's really close to state lines, and you have producers in other states who would really like to be able to sell their product in those border cities. I mean, DC may have some pastured poultry producers, but certainly doesn't have very many, and there's definitely not a lot of room to expand. And the vast majority of the chicken that's coming to DC farmers markets is going to be coming from Pennsylvania or Maryland or Virginia. And for farmers like us to take the poultry that we're raising to DC, we have to get it processed again at a USDA inspected slaughterhouse. The issue with that is that there are very few custom USDA poultry processors. So there was one in the state of Maryland, and they've since stopped doing custom poultry processing. They only process their own birds now. There's one other that I'm aware of that's in Pennsylvania, and guess what? Obviously, they all got super booked. Like, we were able to get one date in the spring, and then there was like a random opening in the fall. They can process something like 200 chickens a week. So that's nothing. That's nothing. So if I were to propose a policy change, I would say that this is an opportunity where the USDA could create a program that would allow on-farm processed poultry to cross state lines under certain circumstances, perhaps if they're being sold directly to end consumers. I think that would be a huge boon to farmers. Poultry is actually like a pretty great business to get into because it's a relatively short timeline from beginning to end. So you've got really good cash flow, and there's a lot of demand, and chicken's great. And on the other side of it is, if you do not have any aversion to doing your own processing, that's a way to actually retain more of your profits, because you're not having to pay someone else to do that part of your animal production. And with pork and beef, the processing costs are a substantial part that is completely that's out of house. That's can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your perspective. But with poultry, for us at least, it's been really nice that we can process our own birds, but that only applies to the birds that we're selling within Maryland. With regards to the question of mobile processing units, I think that they can be a really, really wonderful way for people, especially to begin when they're getting into farming. If they're starting a pasture-based livestock operation, capital investments are pretty expensive, and to be able to kind of space out when you have to do different things can be really nice. So as an example, there was an NPU about 45 minutes from us, and when we began our farm and started processing our own poultry, we would rent that on our processing days. And so it's a trailer, we hooked it up to our truck, brought it to our farm, did all of our processing, cleaned it up, sent it back. And that let us kind of test the waters, make sure that we had a market for our product. It helped us put off when we needed to make those kinds of investments, figure out things about how we wanted to set up our own system, the kind of equipment we wanted, the layout that we wanted. So in that respect, an MPU was a really great thing for our farm in the beginning. I think in the long run, if pastured poultry is something that you're looking at doing as an integral part of your business, it probably makes more sense to have your own equipment. But yeah, like with many things, it can be good to be able to try something out and see what works and what doesn't before you go and invest in like $5,000 worth of equipment. Yeah, I think those are my main ideas. Feel free to ask me more specifically about any of it.
Just as a point of clarification, so you do send your chickens to USDA inspected slaughterhouses so that you can sell them retail?
When we are taking chickens to DC for sale at our farmers market, we send those chickens to a USDA inspected processor. That's probably only about 400 to 500 birds out of our 5,000. So the rest of them we're processing ourselves.
Okay. Well, and the mobile poultry processing units, those are, of course, not USDA inspected.
I am not aware of anyone. I don't think that would be possible. I would be surprised.
Maybe we can get a mobile inspector to go with the mobile.
I mean, that'd be cool. I think it would be a lot more efficient to work on changing the USDA rules around interstate sales of poultry. I think that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. We know that slaughterhouse bottlenecks are huge. They're a huge issue. We've heard that in the RCR idea dump, almost everybody mentions this, and it's something that Future Harvest and the partners on this project are going to be working on some policy changes. So stay tuned on that. Emma is owner operator of Moon Valley Farm in Woodsboro, Maryland. That's also in Frederick County, same as MK's farm. It's a CSA operation that has done some very impressive pivots to adapt to a new normal of the pandemic. Emma was on our COVID community call. It seems years ago, but it was at the beginning of the pandemic and everything was uncertain. Now things have kind of settled out. And so she's going to tell us about her farm, how it's going now, how demand is. So Emma, I turn it to you.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, Moon Valley Farm, we sell through a CSA program, and we also sell to restaurants in Baltimore and DC. Before COVID started, we exclusively sold to restaurants between January and May, and CSA and restaurants the remainder of the year. When COVID started, we decided to launch our CSA program 7 weeks early and only offered home delivery in order to safely get boxes to our community members. Demand went through the roof and allowed us to double our CSA program size from our 2019. And we've also been selling to restaurants this season as well. It's just been slower than anticipated. And so, yeah, it's going pretty well. We signed up our CSA members for the year. Our CSA goes through the end of December. So we had a 40-week CSA program this year, and we're actually going year-round with our CSA as well, to keep that aligned with our year-round restaurant sales. I think that's a really important part of my ethos, is allowing or serving people food year-round so that they can really cultivate the habit of incorporating local food into their diets. So yeah, that's what we do. We have about a 500 plus CSA program, and we sell to over 50-ish restaurants.
Great. So I know that you've been doing a lot of thinking about the food system. You've been interviewed by other folks about this topic. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about the food system at large in which you operate. Any kind of policy or infrastructure changes you would like to see, education offerings, that kind of thing. So let's hear.
Well, thank you. One of the first things on my mind personally with my business this year, and I saw that one of the participants mentioned this as well, is how do you retain the new CSA members that farmers have acquired this year? How do we keep them eating local in future years? It was really clear why they decided to join the local food movement this year because there was a dearth of availability at grocery stores and the ways that they've traditionally gotten food. And so they turned to local farmers, but what's going to keep them? What's going to let us keep them? So I've focused a lot of my attention this season on onboarding, and I actually have always focused a decent amount of attention on onboarding because this the problem of customer acquisition and CSA member retention, I identified along with many other farmers across the nation and the world as a really big issue for farmers, especially CSA farmers. How do we keep the members that we have? It'll really reduce our costs of customer acquisition if we can keep the members that we have. So I think it would really behoove us. It would be, and I guess in conjunction with that being a major problem for CSA farmers, we also have the tendency to not dedicate a lot of time and resources to marketing or onboarding because we're frankly just too busy. So we've traditionally spent too little time on onboarding, and our customers need onboarding the most, especially because they're transitioning from this grocery store system that offers sort of phenomenal selection year-round of all sorts of things that we can't grow locally here year-round. So tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, watermelons, all the time year-round. And we have to train our customers to love beets in the winter and kale instead. And there's a whole lot of questions about why don't you have that year round? Why don't you, I anticipated tomatoes in November. Why don't you have them? And I think it would be really beneficial to have some organizational help on that front, defining what seasonality is in the Mid-Atlantic, sort of just a marketing campaign on what is available when, a calendar of what's available, just all sorts of resources and how to preserve the flavors that we have, the seasonal flavors that we highly value, like tomatoes. How do you put up your own tomatoes? And for people that don't have time to put up those products themselves, like make hot sauce and things like that, how do we, where do people go if they want to use tomato sauce year round, if they want to have hot sauce year round? What are places that they can support? So I think it would be really beneficial to have onboarding help. It honestly wouldn't be that hard or take that much that much dedicated time, I think, but somebody has to be paid to do it. And those resources can be shared among farmers so that we can share with our members on how to be more successful in seasonal and local eating. I also think that it would be really beneficial to have an independent organization to help monitor banks and others who give resources to farmers. Banks have, getting access to loans is huge. I spent 8 years leasing land in order to start my farm and was really nervous about my ability to get a loan because I don't earn that much money and because, mostly because I don't earn that much money. They give me a lot of money. And I can see that across age, race, gender, all sorts of different demographics, ability, that banks discriminate. And it would be really helpful to, I remember going to a lot of different workshops at Future Harvest and other conferences and have people ask questions about, well, how many loans do you give out across these different demographics? And frankly, the officers don't have that information. They don't know exactly who they're giving resources to, and it's hard to keep them accountable to being fair. if nobody's keeping that information. So to have an independent organization to help keep banks and those who give out grants accountable, that would really help. I think increase the ability of those who want to farm to allow them to farm. And like other people said, access to shared resources would be huge. You know, as a vegetable farmer, for me, I want access to things like no-till drills, bigger tractors for occasional use, bigger implements, absolutely cold storage. You know, everybody needs cold storage sometimes. I know I've talked to several farmers this year who's just, you know, that it's just sometimes your cold storage goes out for a week, or sometimes you have a bumper crop and you just need to put, you know, you just need additional cold storage for a short period of time. And it's really, really difficult to find cold storage that you can use. Having resources like access to loan documents or things that you need to apply for loans. I had trouble creating a lease document to lease land. And once I had that, I was asked for it by countless people who just don't have access to lawyers, or even lawyers who know what we're dealing with. Because a lot of lawyers have no experience working with ag or drafting ag related documents. So that would be really huge. I think also resources on how to navigate labor, how to find trained labor, or even how to navigate the H2A process if you're trying to go that route. Definitely agree with what Will said about the farm bill, and also about access to commercial kitchens. That kind of thing would be really phenomenal for small scale farmers trying to go into the value added market. And I think we should have incubator farms as well, farm spaces for people to get started, to create demand, to get them a few years of working education before launching their own businesses. That would be hugely beneficial. I know that there are some in Pennsylvania. I'm not really sure if there are any in Maryland or not, but having the opportunity to work land for a few years would be huge without taking on the burden of a mortgage, or if you can't find lease land available for lease in your region. And I also think food hubs would be great. I know I'm running out of time, and frankly, I don't know that much about it, but I do know that Chris Newman runs a farm in Virginia, and I think he's speaking maybe at your conference. But he has a lot of really great things to say about food hubs. So if anyone is interested in that, I would point them in his direction.
Okay, thank you, Emma. It's great ideas. I'm sure you'll get lots of questions later. Let's just go on to Renard. Renard is owner operator of Vanguard Ranch in Central Virginia. It's about 40 minutes from Charlottesville. I visited Renard and his wife Jeanette when we filmed our video Go Grass Fed. We learned a lot about the transportation and slaughterhouse challenges he faced living in the countryside, as well as the racism that he faced securing loans for his farm, and in basically all aspects of establishing his farm. So Renard, start us off by telling us a bit about your farm, what you raise, and where your markets are. We can't hear you. I can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here and share with this group. As fellow farmers, we certainly do have many things in common. So Vanguard Ranch was started as an act of liberation for my wife and I. We left Washington, D.C. in 1977 as part of the Back to Land movement. We were Mother Earth news people and have been following and reading those publications for many years. So for me, unlike many, my getting into farming is a result of, number one, my lifelong interest in agriculture and agricultural sciences and agricultural engineering. But most importantly and central to my movement from the city was as an African-American male, it's an act of liberation. Because after so many generations of being here and being subjected to the types of social injustices that I find my people are still subjected to, it came down to a very logical conclusion. At the root of all of this was our collective dependency on a system that did not recognize, appreciate, or respect us. That is a central problem. So I farm as an act of liberation first, second as an act of self-sufficiency, and third as a way to maintain my own personal dignity so I do not have to have people's knees on my neck or be standing in lines begging for social handouts. I think that farming and agriculture is a very strong, direct way for African Americans to regain freedom in this country. It is not going to be legislated to us. We must be able to provide for ourselves. So first, liberation and self-sufficiency. Now, Vanguard Ranch was started when my wife and I dug into our pockets and decided to buy land in Louisa County, Virginia. That process was difficult. I went to several real estate agencies, and every time that I showed up, I was either sent to a portion of the county which was largely African American and its population density. I always went in saying I wanted at least 100 acres, and I was always sent to something that was 15 or 20. And it was like, I know they could understand what I was saying, but they could not conceive that a Black person in their, at that time, in my 20s, 30s, would be able to take care of that or to do that. So it was a long and arduous journey. So what happened was this. My wife worked for a legal company in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we utilized an attorney who doesn't look like me to go and do all of our closing paperwork and all of the filing at the county. Because as God is my witness, had I not done that, I would have never gotten the piece of land that I got. So we started off purchasing 94 acres of land through a private owner who did independent financing for us. At that time, I was an employee of the University of Virginia on the hospital side, where I spent 25 years working as a healthcare professional. So I had really good credit. I had, a state check coming in every month. So we started this purchase and we purchased this land. Now, that part went fine. But as I said before, we would have never been sold this piece of property had I gone in person. And I'm not exaggerating at all. It just would have never happened. So we got the land. Now we had to be faced with, how do we turn this into a working farm? And unlike many of you who either had some experience in farming, which we did not, although I do have a background in agricultural science and engineering when I was a member of the Future Farmers of America in my high school days in California. But we did this all on a wing and a prayer, but largely because we really wanted to be self-sufficient, get out of the inner city. So I ended up taking out a hard money loan because of the faith that I had in my ability to make this work, and also because of the faith that my wife had in me. It was probably, in retrospect, not the best thing to do, but had I not done that, I wouldn't have the wisdom that I do now to share with everyone who wishes to get into this type of a venture. And I listened to what William was saying very carefully, and a lot of it clicked, because I've been doing this full time since 2006, when I retired, quote unquote, from the University of Virginia. And it's been very difficult. It has been the most financially stressful time in my life. And I'll tell you a little bit about that as we go forward. So I borrowed money from a private lender after going to the USDA, after going to my local banks, after showing up with a over 700 credit score, after showing up when I was the national secretary of the Kiko Meat Goat Association and being on the cover of the magazine of that industry, which I took with me to the bank, after there was a 6-page article in there on my farm where the leading goat experts in this country were saying how wonderful my model was. And if they were 20 years younger, they would move here and throw in with me. the bank still sent me a Dear John letter within 48 hours and offered me nothing. Therefore, after exhausting every conventional method, I found a hard money lender. And I found this out when I went to a bank, again, in my local county. And the person at the bank said to me, well, Mr. Turner, he says, actually it was a she says, take this card and call these people. I know them, they're friends of mine, and they may be interested in helping you out. I took that advice and I went. And this was from a Hispanic bank loan officer who recommended me to another person in another county. Well, long story short, I went there. I gave them my pitch, provided them the same identical information that I had provided to the US, to the FSA, Farm Service Agency, and the USDA for loans. And they read it and they said, okay. And they wrote me a check for like $96,000. But now here's the deal. It might sound like a lot of money, but it's really not if you're going to start a farm and you're going to fence it and buy livestock and everything else that needs to go with that, and be able to pay for your living expenses, mortgage, land payment, utilities, food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, I worked my behind off, every day. I managed to work at the university on a 4 days on, 4 days off shift because of the type of work I did, but all of my off time was spent on that farm. I mean, pulling fences and so forth and so on and getting things going. We struggled with that for a number of years. Got to the point where that I couldn't make all of these payments on this hard money loan. So long story short, went back to FSA. This is 12 years that transpired in between these two. Second time around, with the help of Virginia State University, I was able to secure an FSA loan. And in retrospect, probably, well, not probably, I would say this, it was the worst mistake that I made, because then I was forced to have these big loan payments. And as farmers, I'm sure you can feel that pain. It becomes very stressful to make $25,000 payments or $75,000 balloon payments. But that's the reality of this thing when you get into it. So I say this to caution everyone, decrease your dependency on every method that requires you to become indebted, because debt is the devil. And for our farms to prosper, we're working on slim margins anyway. And what's really necessary is a paradigm shift in how America eats. I am a major proponent of regional food systems. Our food systems need to be regionalized. I think we all get that. We need to lower our carbon footprints. We need to treat the earth differently. So it's a long story, but there's a lot more to it. You'll have to read my book. But in the purposes of today's video, I will tell you this. We have learned how to survive. We have learned how to survive by being fluid in how we operate our farm from season to season. Our central focus is on our meat goat herd, which we've raised for about 15 years now. We have a very strong selection process. Our animals are very, very healthy and very, very good. Now, the problem is, as MK was talking about, getting them to an abattoir. I think, and William mentioned that too. It's damn near impossible for meat goat producers to do that and get a USDA certified animals now. I'm looking at maybe April in 2021 being able to have some animals processed. Why that is important is because the central part of our business is our mobile concession unit. We bought that so that we'd be able to market our own farm-raised products. I believe in taking it from the cradle to the grave, if you will. I don't like middlemen. That is the nemesis of small farms. The middleman always gets a piece of you. You don't get a piece of them. That's how it's set up. That's how it works. That's why this system needs to change. We can only change it when people begin to recognize that we are essential to their being able to eat. Right now, that's not the case because the big ag businesses are going to run the show. But it's up to the citizens, it's up to the people to make that paradigm shift. So I'm here to say that the changes that can be made by policies are incremental to the changes that really need to be made, which are cultural and social. That's where the shift needs to really be. Then people will understand that we are important, and then they will pay the market price. And they will do that in the same way that they don't mind paying for expensive clothes or, a weekend in the Bahamas or whatever they like to do. So all of these issues that we mentioned on before are very much compounded if you're African American or any other minority in this country. That's just a fact of American history that's not going to change. Yeah. So I farm as an act of liberation. I farm for self-sufficiency. We're currently doing the meat goats. We started a squabbery recently because we had to find a niche market that we could be able to control ourselves. The work on our farm is done by 3 senior citizens, my wife, myself, and Mr. Richard Yates. That's the 3 of us who do all the work, and we're all senior citizens. I'm the youngest one, and I'm 68. So that's the reality here, and we do everything. I build it, fix it, fence it, repair it, finance it. I do everything. That's the reality. I do the marketing as well. So we started the squabbery largely because I can use the poultry exemption, and I can do up to 1,000 animals a year as long as I don't do intrastate sales. But not being greedy, that works for me with my business model, being organic and sustainable. I will only do what I can do with 6 hands. I'm not interested in expanding beyond that because it's just not an economy of scale that works for me. And debt is the devil. And I swear, I had to go through a bankruptcy to keep what I have. And I will never go through that stuff again because it simply is not worth it. Unfortunately, America's in for a serious wake-up call because the way things are looking, and I'm talking about on a planetary level, food is going to become a serious issue. It's already highly politicized, but it's going to become even a more serious issue. Now, I'm going to make a quick segue because I don't want to run my mouth too much, but as far as African Americans are concerned, you know, we talk about all the social injustice and inequities that we know exist in America. Okay, so I will say to all of you who can hear me, if you don't know who Jane Elliott is, look her up, listen to some of her videos, get another understanding of this thing. Because, you know, it's very important that you understand this. Jane Elliott is going to give you a wake-up call. Now, we talk about food deserts. I don't like that term. It's really food apartheid. It's really food apartheid based on systemic racism that this country was built on from day one. Why do most African Americans not have access to fresh, healthy food? Why is there no fresh produce, fresh fruit juices, fresh fruits? Why are we having these problems that related to obesity and congestive heart failure and diabetes that occur at a disproportionate rate in African American communities? It's because of the politics of economics. It's because of redlining that's been done throughout their lives. It's because of a lack of health food stores or even big box supermarkets in their neighborhoods. And it's all based on the hue of their skin. It's all based on racism. That's where we are today. So you can trickle this down, but that's why does anybody know how many African American farmers there are in this country right now? Here's some statistics for you all. African Americans own less land now than we did in 1935. Less land than we did in 1935. United States Department of Agriculture says there's about 1.46% of the farmers in this country are African Americans. 1.46. And I would venture to say that of that 1.46, it might be 0.46 that are operating in the green and making a profit. It is a very dismal landscape for us. And most of us, our houses are on fire and we're up in the 2nd story and the flames are coming up the stairwell. That's the reality for being an African-American farmer in this country now. So I like these conversations about aggregating and how to get a bigger part of the market share. Yeah, they're all very realistic avenues for making your farm more profitable. But the bottom line is, if you don't have customers, good luck with that one. It doesn't pan out without the customer base being there. So I will be this outspoken advocate for African-American farmers because agriculture as a vocation is a means to liberation and self-sufficiency. We need this paradigm shift in our community in order to create a healthier outcome for our people and be able to have heritable generational wealth, which we do not have because we're always starting off from zero because the children don't inherit anything but poverty, grief, and a bunch of social injustice. So yes, you know, I love farming, but I farm as an act of liberation. I farm as an act of self-sufficiency, and I farm as a way to keep people's knees off my neck. And I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to share more.
Thank you. I have other questions, but I wanted to have you talk about ethnic foods versus non-ethnic foods. But wait. Don't, we're almost at 2:00, which is the end time for this webinar. We've really had a lot of interesting panelists, and I just want to make sure that we have time for questions as well as the polls. So Caroline, I've changed my mind, and I think we need to run the polls with the questions. So if you can put again the link to Mentimeter in the chat, everybody make sure you've already clicked on that, and you can see the first poll.
Sure, hang on, I'm just bringing that link up for everyone, and I will have it here shortly. All right, everyone, here comes the link. And would you like me to share my screen?
Yes, so everybody, the first poll question, do we have that slide up?
It is coming up now. Okay, so the first question, so this is the one that folks answered already. When you joined, and this is if you haven't answered the poll yet, this is the link that it's gonna prompt, the question that it'll prompt you to answer. And then would you like me to go to the next slide?
No.
Okay.
So this is your opportunity to share your ideas. I'm going to turn to the questions, and while the panelists are thinking of them, you're going to have to multitask here because I don't want to run too far over. Okay. Bjorn has asked, what are some best practices for retaining new member farmers acquired during COVID? And I guess I would ask MK, I remember you saying way back when that you were worried that you were going to have a huge drop off. Has that happened, and how have you retained your new members? MK, you might be on mute. Is she gone? Huh. Okay, Emma, I'll turn the question to you.
Well, I'm struggling with this myself as we got several hundred new CSA members this year. And I think that an important part of what I call onboarding new members is it happens every week. Every time you give them produce, you have to help them use it. And I think a lot of members for CSAs, new members, struggle with actually using all of their product and quit because they feel guilty about having rotted or not fully utilized what they paid for. And so really holding their hand the whole time really helps. It takes a lot of time and resources, and it can feel very frustrating to do it. I created years ago, when I first started the farm, a closed CSA Facebook group where people can share recipes and advice and have help identifying different crops that they get in their box and are unfamiliar with. And that has really helped. It's really taken off this season. We send a weekly newsletter with full of recipes and explanations on how weather events have affected our farm and therefore the crops that they're seeing in their share. And so really it's constant education. We came up with a resource as well, and we shared it with all of our new all of our members, the new and existing ones, on what to anticipate in each month's boxes, so that they'll see that there's not tomatoes listed in November, and we can gently refer to that throughout the season.
I'm going to
Yeah.
interrupt you just quickly. I guess you sort of answered this when you spoke earlier, but you're asking to help you retain members. Is there a role that MDA can play? The Maryland Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, I think we need a broader education on what Mid-Atlantic food is, what seasonal food is in our region. And that could be a big marketing campaign on what local flavors are in our region. It could be a point for helping restaurants as well as helping them support local farms, and even helping tourists be successful at finding what the flavors of the Mid-Atlantic are, if the public itself is confident on what seasonal food is in the region.
Great. So Caroline, can you share the results of the first poll question?
Sorry, the next slide for the RCR poll.
Yes. Yeah, okay, that. So you can see what people are saying. Is there a way to scroll down? Oh, you have to scroll down yourself. It's a lot of words. It's probably pretty hard to absorb it all. One thing that I've been hearing a lot is create a different set of policies for small farms versus larger farms. Will brought that up. I think Joel Salatin has been talking about this a lot, but I think especially they attempted this with food safety, but having different requirements, thresholds for meeting, for having to engage in high-level food safety protocols on your farm. But I think this has to be across the board. This sort of whole separate, regulatory system for small farmers. And then we need to load up into policymakers' minds what those policies should be for small acre farm, for smaller to mid-scale farmers. Okay, let's go to poll question number 2. What are the most important infrastructure improvements needed to build a stronger, more resilient food system?
Looks like there's some room for more folks to fill this one out if anyone hasn't yet.
Okay. So, Sarah, I only have one other question in here. Is that, do I not have the right document? Sarah?
There are 2 questions here pasted in the chat box.
You were going to paste them into the Google Doc.
Yep, they're there, and I also just pasted them in the chat box.
Okay, so we just have 2 questions.
Yep.
Okay. So Billy Hackett from the National Sustainable Ag Coalition asks, what impact has consolidation in the food and ag industry had on your ability to compete in the industry or in the marketplace? So I'll turn this to Will.
I'm sorry, Dina, can you repeat that?
What impact has consolidation in the food and ag industry? What impact did that have on your farm and your?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it was immense. So our inputs, for example, feed mills, what happened was the primary users of corn and soybean in the area, the poultry industry in the Eastern Shore and stuff, they basically started, growing their own feed and then having their own mills. And so smaller operations like us, basically feed mills just started closing down all over the area. And so you weren't able to go and have feed custom made for you based on your own specification. In our case, we were raising heritage breeds, which have a different metabolism, quite frankly, and different nutritional needs than the modern Cornish cross rock, for example. And so we had to have our feed for optimal efficiency, which translates to optimal profits. We had our feed custom made, and normally it wasn't a big deal. The local small grain growers would sell their product to local feed mills, and then the local feed mills would custom make feed formulations for pigs and for poultry, and even less so, but also for sheep and goats and stuff. So that was one impact. And then of course you've heard a lot of people talking about abattoirs and stuff. That was one of the first things that the big meat producers consolidated and brought and integrated vertically into their operations, where they either bought out the local abattoirs or they built their own. And so there's just a lot fewer places to take your product to be finished, which is necessary in order to sell it. So both from the input side as well as from the processing of our products is where the consolidation of the industry, I think, really hurt us. And I will say that I feel very fortunate that being in Maryland, we still have more of that independent infrastructure and agriculture in place than you see in Virginia and West Virginia and other areas not far from us.
Okay. All right, so let's go. You can see some of the answers here. And again, we'll be sharing these in some way. I guess if you send it, Caroline, can you say, I saw in the chat before we started that if you share your email, you can get access to the answers.
So we're going to be asking folks for your email addresses, and yeah, we can definitely send out a compilation of the answers.
Okay, and they enter their email addresses where?
So it's included in some of the questions on the survey, that if you've gone through to the end of the survey, you'll be entering some personal information that we're not going to share on the screen here.
Okay. All right, let's go to so these, can you scroll again through the infrastructure improvements? Okay. Broadband, that is a huge one. It affects Future Harvest staff quite a bit. The people on the Eastern Shore are like reporting from Baghdad. So we really need to get everybody broadband. Public transportation, food waste reduction, equipment rental options. Can you scroll up? More diversified farms, more equitable access to land, and cooperative distribution and aggregation networks for small to mid-scale farmers. Great. Let's move to the next one. Okay. I put the first one in, state-funded beginner farmer training programs. We've always had to go to the federal government for funding for that. And yet Future Harvest provides this big service to the states by churning out new farmers and bringing them online. So I've been a vocal advocate for getting more state funding for training programs. Consumer education, agroecology, business and finance, engineering, mechanics. Everything that Emma's been saying, I think what Renard has been saying about racism, teaching about that. And also that many of our agricultural practices in this country are rooted in what slaves brought over with them from Africa. And I think that that's a really important thing for all children to learn. Okay. Let's keep scrolling down. Okay. College agriculture should be more hands-on. Yep, I can see that. A lot of book learning, but farming is all about learning in the field. Okay, let's go to the last one. Research. Yeah, more investment in SARE, which is the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program of USDA. They give grants directly to producers as well as to service providers to do research on their farms. Effects of compost on soil health, alternative financing structures, probably like Kickstarter, crowdsourcing. What are the farmers whose needs are not being met? Yeah, again, industry consolidation on its doing research on its impact on local or regional systems to be able to feed themselves. Again, during the pandemic, we did not have what we needed to withstand that. So we have to engage farmers and help farmers thrive in between global disruptions. Because we all know there are going to be more coming. Research into water holding capacity of soil, especially based on different soil health practices. Here's another one, traditional plant breeding focused on low input sustainable agriculture systems, regional on-farm variety trials, partnering with seed companies, cooperative marketing. Okay. So these are great ideas. We have about 50 in the RCR idea dump already. Thanks to the Farm Bureau, Maryland Farm Bureau has filled out and offered great suggestions. Loudoun County in Virginia, that Farm Bureau has entered in any suggestions. So we just encourage anybody here, either as an individual or as an organization, to enter your ideas. And again, at the conference, we'll be sharing the results in a more organized way. And then in spring 2021, we'll have a plan, but we're never going to close down that RCR link, that idea dump. We want more ideas to come in. The more specific, the better, because groups, nonprofits can look at them, funders can look at them and say, oh, this looks like an idea that we can tackle. And, sometimes we come up short on, somebody poses something very general and we're like, yeah, that needs to be tackled, but how? What are the specific recommendations you have in drilling down? Where do we put those mobile processing units for poultry? How do we decide that? Who should be running that? Should it be a state funded program? That kind of specificity is what we're looking for. So I am going to close out the webinar. We have gone over, and I just want to thank everybody for your time and attention, and to our fabulous panelists for sharing their insights. And you'll be hearing more from us on this project. Thank you very much. I love this waving in Zoom.
Thanks so much for putting this on.
Thank you, Harry.
Thanks, Dana.